Here we go. Hi, welcome everyone to Allyship's first OutWOMEN virtual event. Really excited to be doing this. Thank you for tuning in. This is one of our newer series of live broadcasts that we're excited about. In addition to our other 3 series, we have This Week in Leadership, Leadership Lounge with Todd, and Equity Matters with Fabrice Hodart, which we've seen many of you dial into, and we thank you again for all of your support. I'd also like to announce that we have some exciting other virtual broadcasts coming to you soon. So please keep following us on social media and watching our weekly broadcasts for more information. Before we get started, I'd also like to take a minute to shout out our member firms with whom we could not do this and do this so well. So first of all, we'd like to thank Greenberg Tuareg, an Outleadership US sponsor, US talent sponsor, as well as MasterCard for sponsoring all of our OutWOMEN events. A special thank you to Sharon, who is one of our guest speakers today, who's coming to us from Hogan Lovells. She is coming to us also from France, so thank you very much for dialing in at that time. And Hogan Lovells is a past sponsor of OutWOMEN, and we appreciate all of their support. And finally, a few other firms that we'd like to thank is Baker Hostetler, For Chance, HSBC, Nomura, PayPal, PIMCO, PwC, and Ropes and Gray. So thank you all for tuning in. I'd also like to take a second to introduce our guest speakers. We have Sharon Lewis, the Global Head of Financial Institutions at Hogan Lovells, and Lanaya Irvin, President for the Center for Talent Innovation. And I'm Kenya Simon. I am the Manager of Member Relations at Outleadership and also an OutWOMEN. So very excited to be hosting this event. Thank you guys for joining. And anybody that's tuning in, you'll see that on your screen there is a question function. So if you have any questions or comments or suggestions as we're going through that you want to see the conversation go a certain way, feel free to let us know, and we'll do our best to get to everybody. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in here. So obviously with COVID-19 and the pandemic, everything that's going on, there is definitely a disproportionate amount of impact to women and LGBT women during this time, career-wise, in the workforce. Just some stats to give an example: 76% of teachers are women, 91% of nurses are women, 71% of wait staff are women, which are all industries that have been just severely impacted by everything going on, as well as financial institutions, legal institutions, consulting, all areas where women have worked really hard to make strides and move equality forward. So, just kind of open it up generally about, is this something we need to worry about, coming out of this? Do we need to be concerned about things sliding backwards? What can we do to prevent that happening and also keep moving things forward? Sharon, I'll let you go first if you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. It's a very big question, and I think it needs to be broken down into little bits. I think there are a number of positives. I think in particular, if you take industries such as nursing, such as the teacher industry, society, I think, has become much more aware, or been made aware again, of the value of those professions in a way that I think we'd actually started to take all of that a lot for granted. And I view that as hugely positive. And so I think that is something really to take away and build on the value of some of the basics to, if you just come back to the basics of what causes our security, our happiness for our children, and even if we don't have children, for future generations, it's professions such as those. And I think that is a very good positive to come out of things. I also think that a good positive is that many governments have tried to think about the family more than just men in the workplace when tackling this crisis. And so looking at, how you furlough employees, looking at how children are being educated at home and the like, I don't perceive that there has been so much from a government perspective of bias towards men. And I think that that is a net change from, probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That said, if you think about the backdrop of 2008, women did suffer disproportionately in 2008 in terms of the redundancies that were made. I think we need to wait a little bit and to see actually how that patterns out in terms of redundancies in this crisis. I think it's too soon to say exactly how that will pan out. But somebody sent me something the other day, it's on LinkedIn, which was, a man was saying, yes, but she's got less to lose than me. For every dollar I get, she gets 79 cents. Well, that means you haven't really understood, mate. She gets 79 cents because actually you're getting $1 and she should get the $1 too. But I do think that is an unconscious bias that plays, because it plays into people's minds. I think that there is a huge opportunity for women and women's groups to force their point across at the moment. I think that governments, as they are thinking about money that's going to be ploughed into the economy post COVID-19, or actually rebuilding post COVID-19, do have ESG, including women, on the agenda. And I think that groups need to be very forceful about that. What concerns me more, and it's something that was seeing before COVID-19, but I think will be accelerated, plays more into the way in which society is evolving, and I'll explain. So women have worked very, very hard to be promoted in a number of professions. My own industry, which is the legal industry, financial services, and a number of others. And, we might not have actually broken the glass ceiling, but, there are quite a few people actually really moving up in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, in the last 10 years, those areas become, quotes, less sexy for men. The ability to make mega bucks in those industries has been more limited as a consequence of the 2008 financial crisis. And I think men have moved much more into venture capital, private equity, and into digitalization. And if you look at prior to COVID-19 and you look carefully, you will see that there are far fewer women in those industries. They are much more male dominated. And even when women are in those industries, it is hard for women to get funding in those industries.
Yeah.
And that was already the case before COVID-19. I think COVID-19 is going to accelerate digitalization, even with the more senior generations. They are obliged to adopt technology. They're obliged, for example, to adopt e-commerce in a way that they might not have done before, just saying, well, that's for my daughter, that's for my son. Actually, now they've had to adopt it themselves, and they're getting pretty good at it. And that is going to create more and more jobs in that digital economy where women are not really, really present. So I think that would be a huge challenge for women going forward. I'll stop there.
I think that's a really great point. And Lanaya, maybe you can speaking about technology and how, this is impacting, all industries, but, especially with women, making strides in STEM. and different parts of the industries where, you know, the focus is definitely going to move to anything on the digital front. You know, what are your thoughts on that, and just the question in general on equity and how things are going to be moving, you know, after all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's and you know, and thank you for that, Sharon. I think, you know, during this global health crisis, and which has become a time of significant, you know, economic dislocation, I know I've been connecting with clients and task force member firms, and most every company is thinking about how COVID will reshape our lives and workplace and impact talent. And, you know, as it relates to the disruption in workforce, I mean, we've already, you know, automation displacing workers has been top of mind for many of us for, you know, 5 to 10 years. And when I think about, to the earlier question or to the earlier, I guess, points you made around, you know, nurses and teachers, and, you know, I think it's one of those things where, yes, women are disproportionately exposed to sectors that are drastically impacted by the pandemic. If you think of airlines, maybe 79, 80% of flight attendants are women, in addition to those other jobs. But it's interesting because there's also going to be this tremendous impact as it relates to technological change, and, you know, the economic fallout could be tragic. I mean, you know, as we're going to experience prolonged uncertainty, obviously furloughs and unemployment, and I think in the near term there's going to be a focus on finding the resources to pay bills, feed one's family in the event that you're, you know, economically impacted. Forward looking, though, in order to navigate the future, this may require an entire globe of women, but even in the US, it may require immediate reskilling, right? Preparing to fit into a rapidly transforming work landscape. And these are the facts. You know, and I think you alluded to STEM, and at CTI, so we've done a lot of research on women, but we did do a report the year before last on women in STEM specifically. And, you know, when I think about the shelter in place and the work from home, and, you know, some of the positive things that were mentioned previously, I also think about, well, what about, you know, the communities of women in workplace who already struggle for visibility, right, and lack access to sponsorship. When we think about women, talent, workplace, this pandemic has potential to amplify what we already know, right? And, you know, we've done studies on you know, sponsorship for ages, and we found time and time and again, you know, having someone to deploy that relationship capital on your behalf, yes, can boost one's career, right? But implicit bias, affinity bias, all those things are still very much present during crisis, in a recession, during downsizing at a firm. And you think about, you know, in that STEM report specifically, you think about just change, representation. They were looking at success factors that we were looking at, you know, for those who actually find success within STEM. What are the kind of common experiences? And for Asian and Black women, that was the ability to bring their authentic self. One of the things was the ability to bring their authentic self was strongly aligned with success. Interestingly, for Latina women, the study found that Latinas who succeeded in STEM were twice as likely as other Latinas to change the way they look, change the way they speak, the way they act for the sake of their careers. And you think about the time where you're, you know, for those who do lack access to senior leaders and strong networks, but then they spend time covering day in, day out during remote work, right? You're forced to lift the veil. it's almost a forced uncovering, right? You can only code switch so much once people are in your home. And I think about where, tech being one and wanting there to be greater representation. But I think even, there's going to be disruption in financial services, many of the industries you mentioned. I think the challenges will be the same. I think the challenges will be, during these challenging times, will companies be able to answer demands to support the community of women within their organization who, have lacked access to power, who have been challenged with advancement and retention, experience in the workplace. So I think, the transformation of the workforce is going to be huge, especially for, those who don't work in a glass tower. We have to remember here that 70% of US workers physically cannot do their jobs at home. And so we're talking about a small group of workers that can. And then we think about a rapidly changing and widening wealth gap amongst workers across the globe, especially as we rely on, the gig economy and, this awakening to technological transformation that is going to disrupt the way that people are able to earn incomes. So.
Yeah, no, and I think, especially going back to your point about mentorship and sponsorship and how that's something that really most marginalized groups, people of color, women, LGBT people really, rely on that, especially at certain stages in their career. And I think, as we move forward and everybody's kind of feeling the pressure and the impact, whether it's, uncertainty, job uncertainty, and really kind of feeling like, can I lean on those resources? Is everyone gonna be more worried about themselves at this point where they're, not really thinking about supporting someone else? So it's really, how as a community can we kind of take all that knowledge and all those stats and really understand where everyone is, because there might be a chance that we may have to, not always be able to rely on some of the more, the ways that we've gotten to where we've gotten at this point once this looks a little different. And I think that goes to, our next question, which is really about, all of the, media attention and the leadership and people kind of leading the way through this pandemic. Don't always look like us and aren't always from our community. And meanwhile, you have, women and LGBT people and people of color that are the most marginalized and most severely impacted. What are some thoughts about, amplifying our voices and making sure that, we have a say in what normal looks like after this is done? If, you can say done, but, Sharon, I'll throw that to you.
That I don't think is just limited to COVID-19, but it's particularly obvious when one looks at COVID-19. You look at the scientists, you look at government, but you look at success. You look at some of the countries which are showing success, like New Zealand, which is led by a woman, like Germany, which is led by a woman. And you wonder if there is not a correlation between success in this crisis and being a woman. And I do think that there are lots of reasons why women actually are better in this type of crisis than men. This crisis is not about war. This crisis is not about aggression. This crisis is not about warriorship. This crisis really is about nurturing, but actually also about really, thinking very carefully about the consequences of what you do. I think it's also about being creative And I think being creative actually is, something which women play hugely well into when one speaks in generalities. But I do think that for this voice to be heard, women's groups like this one, but also, lots of others need to lobby much, much more, and need to bring a voice, an economic voice, with them as they lobby. I think it's really important, and I think that anybody, so whether you are listening to this and you're very young in your career, whether you are listening to this and you are much older in your career, or actually whether you don't have a career at the moment, it's only by actually becoming, I wouldn't say militant, but you have a voice, exercise your voice, get involved in community groups, and push. And if you don't push, and then when you can, and when you do have a voice, if you don't then exercise that voice and you don't show the way, then in 20 years' time we'll be the same. And I come back to the point that I was making about my concern about digitalization and the absence of women. Again, you can think about education. I think one of the things that struck me or strikes me is that women seek excellence generally, and we tend, when we are not at our best, not to want to do something, which I think is why women are turned off by the sciences and turned off by maths programs. And it's not because we're any good, not any good at it. We are, but we don't like not having the praise that can come with writing the essay in history, the praise that you can get for doing it well. That's not so prevalent in those fields, and men just don't actually think about that. They just get on and they do it. So I'm very keen, as education is reset, to really push STEM in schools. My daughter at the moment is graduating from college, and I think she's listened to her mother a lot, and is going to do a master's in STEM, despite having done history at college and being much more naturally happy in that area. And I mean, just a tiny story, and I think it brings the answer to life. I do a lot of work in the fintech sector, and a guy who is very well known in that sector is a guy called Lawrence Wintermeyer. And when my daughter Madeline was about 15, she and I had lunch with Lawrence, and he was talking about this and bringing women into the digital area, and we're talking about coding. And again, women don't code, men code. If I look at my son, he's naturally interested in coding. My daughter was not. And Lawrence was hugely helpful. He said, well, look, the first coders were women. And they did that during the war. And they were very good coders because women are naturally very organized, much more organized than men. And he said, I shouldn't say this, but they were very good at following recipes. And if you can follow a recipe, you can code. And he went on to say, and the next best coders are lawyers, because lawyers are able to synthesize lots of information. So my message, I think, is really find your voice, get involved. You have a vote, exercise that vote. Exercise that vote by putting aside your own prejudice vis-a-vis women. We're very critical of each other, and really embrace the technology that's coming.
I think that's good advice. Lanaya, from your perspective, what are your thoughts around kind of, amplifying our voices, making sure, that we come out of this clear with, what we need. I'm even thinking, just going back to what Sharon said about, working from home and digitalization and all those things. And your point that that's not the majority of the workforce that are, as you said, in these glass towers. So how do we make sure we're not only heard, but we speak for as many of us as possible?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, and I know that it's actually the challenging question, because many of us don't know the best way to leverage our voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our voices and or access. But I think this is, if nothing else, what we've learned from this global pandemic. And when we now see a disproportionate impact to, Black and brown communities, obviously the poorest communities paying the highest price. We've seen what we've already known exposed, right? Structural inequality that reflects public health and economic disparities that have long existed, long been intertwined. And I think, for many, the thought is, well, where do I start? And I think there's a tremendous call to action, I believe, for allyship, a tremendous call to action for our firms, for individual stakeholders, to commit, to acknowledging, the varied impacts to various communities, whether it's women or LGBT, our Asian colleagues, Black and brown colleagues. I think this is definitely an inflection point for the world. And so I think it's fantastic for us to war with it and then respond to the call to do more in the way that we see fit. But I did want to, you actually, you'd asked about the lack of visibility of kind of women or diverse voices as it relates to, during this whole pandemic. And, when we think about public health, we even think about private side and, what our medical directors look like and, who's visibly kind of leading the charge. We're holding up a mirror to society in a way that shouldn't be shocking, right? I spoke with a colleague, a good friend of mine. He's at Harvard and he does health equity work at Harvard. And from our conversation, it seems that in the academic medical centers of the world, the headwinds are the same, right? Similar to what we've observed in corporate America: lack of mentorship, sponsorship, barriers to promotion and advancement. And so there's this, lack of support in a work environment that leads to attrition and, kind of other challenges for diverse leaders in the medical field. That would be similar to what we know to be the case in corporate America. And so we're just now seeing that mirror being held up into a very critical part of our workforce. And so just shining a light on this absence and this not only of diverse leaders, because they may be there, but they're not of authority, right, in medicine. And actually might be something that CTI needs to look into. But it is one of those things that, right. It is, one of those things where I've over the past couple of months, spent a lot of time thinking about, where we can be leveraging our voices. And I think, the community of women, we need to think across intersections and explore ways to be allies. But I don't, when we talk about, automation and digitalization and, it's like any economy, it's cyclical, right? And there are jobs that are in demand where we may not have the strongest representation. But I don't believe that women shy away from difficult tasks. I don't believe that, we want anything different than we would, if at a law firm or a financial services firm or, in social work. We did, CTI, we launched a study a while back, 5 things women want. Then we also looked at what Black women wanted after we saw a few things kind of coming out. We did a separate report. We looked at 5 things that women want. And what we found was kind of simple. Across professions, women want the ability to flourish, earn well, reach for meaning and purpose, ability to empower others, to be empowered. And I don't think those desires will change if the job market changes. If the jobs become STEM or tech jobs, I think women will find roles and pursue roles that are available, and those desires will still exist. The desire to be able to take care of oneself and to have meaning and purpose. Realistically, though, in the current state and we're currently exiting the longest economic expansion in history. But the expectations may change, right? The desires will always be there in the immediate term, the short term, and surely it'll be perhaps more difficult to earn well. Unemployment or unemployed talent may pursue jobs that are available to them, even if they don't consider that, and maybe not consider in the same way whether or not their skills are being fully utilized. And they may not search for a culture where they can reach for meaning and purpose. And these are all actually really harmful things, right? But the priority will be focused on having an income, being able to pay for a shelter and feed your family. And so I think we have, I think being a someone who is kind of visibly, kind of answering the call to action, it's important so that we don't actually experience the erosion of what matters to talent in the workplace, to corporate cultures, to women, and all cohorts. In fact, we don't go so far one direction, focus on survival, that we lose what actually, makes us better leaders, better humans, better allies in the work.
No, I think. I'm sorry. Okay. No, I think that's a really good point, and I think kind of going towards LGBT women in particular, and how how this affects our group. Both of you have mentioned allyship, and at OutLeadership, we're working on our own ally research, and how allyship looks in the workplace. That'll be released in the next couple of months, and I think something that we don't talk about when we talk about allyship and talent and mentoring and how it all works together is also allyship within the community itself. Obviously, there is a disproportionate amount of effect on LGBT women, let alone, as opposed to, maybe gay men, maybe white gay men. And as you kind of break down, and you get, to speaking about looking at stats around transgender folks and everyone, it kind of shows the need for, as a community, for us to really support each other as well where we can. And just specifically with our group, I'll throw this to you, Sharon, maintaining that sense of allyship throughout this time where people really might kind of feel the need to kind of maybe go within more and maybe worry, kind of about themselves a bit. How do you suggest or recommend maybe, keeping that energy going, kind of the overall theme of not sliding things backwards?
I'd say something, a few things. I mean, first of all, I am a straight woman. I have become involved in OutLeadership over the years, and so you have in me a strong ally. But what I would say is that, over the last 10 years, men in particular have embraced their sexuality and who they are in a way that women have not. And I'm not quite sure why that is the case. But if I just take, myself and my professional environment and my family environment, and I live between London and Paris. In London, I think probably like New York, one knows, one is aware of more women, and certainly very aware about men. In Paris, while I know a number about men, and they are, colleagues, friends, and the like, I actually only know one OutWoman. And I don't think it's because there is only one OutWoman in my social or professional circle in Paris. I think that there is still a lot of work to do there in terms of creating an environment where people feel comfortable about who they are and what they are. And I actually think in that women, more than men, as a generality, are much more critical, this search for perfection of themselves and others, which creates an environment which makes it more difficult for other women. And whether that be, women who have children, i.e. were not working, or whether it's because women who haven't got children, we find lots and lots of things to criticize each other for. And I think that one needs to be much more inclusive and less judgmental of each other. And I think actually that it's including, from my perspective, within the OutWomen communities. Does that answer your question, Kelly?
Yeah, no, that does answer the question. I think that's interesting, especially, you are such a strong ally to the community. I think that perspective is important. Lanaya, what are your thoughts?
It's, I just continue to think about within the LGBT community, the, existing need for allyship. We have to, now more than ever, we have to be aware and respectful of the varied experiences and headwinds the LGBT community may experience across intersections. And here we're discussing, LGBT women, or what women may face. Because if we do, then we spend less time focused on ourselves and the experience. And I think it's important to be kind of centered in that, but also you begin to think about, okay, well, how can you use that energy more productively, to activate, yourself, I guess towards allyship across the community. I'm thinking about, LGBT women, obviously, or any member of the community, whether it's caregiving demands, right? Those with children at home, or elder care, obviously rising domestic violence, which does impact LGBT households as well. I spent a lot of time, 8 years on the board of New York Anti-Violence Project, so I know I've seen the data. You guys should go look at legacy reports. Intimate partner and domestic violence is definitely something that is still very much seen in LGBT households. Think about the poverty rates in the LGBT community in general, across this country. There are, kind of material headwinds for us, as a community. And you think about, trans women, you think about gender non-conforming individuals who've been frozen out of traditional workplaces historically. And for me, then that gives me it anchors me to the point where I actually can explore what allyship looks like.
Yeah.
It's been really it's interesting. It's come up for me quite a bit over the past few weeks, especially when we think about, we're leading our teams, we're thinking about, working remote and, what that brings. But many of you may have digested the LGBT global research Out in World that CTI launched with Kenji Yoshino a couple years ago. And in that research, we set out 3 models for engagement. And many firms, one it's Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, or Bank of America Securities, many firms now leverage kind of this framework or model for engagement when they're kind of articulating, what they do. So there's a when in Rome, embassy, advocate. Very simple, right? So, despite a large multinational's desire to consistently apply their commitment to LGBT equality in whatever country they do business, doing so is not always in their control. In reality, it poses a significant concern for, many employers, where, it may be illegal or death penalty.
Safety of employees, sometimes comes first. Yeah.
Yeah. So when there's a when in Rome or corporate policy, you just adhere to the local norms of the jurisdiction, right? In order to preserve the safety of your employees, you have no choice, just to comply with local law. The embassy model, which is what many companies employ more often, is where a firm retains, allows the company to enforce their pro-LGBT policies within their own walls, right, within their glass tower. So the local office becomes a kind of embassy, right, where the firm's pro-LGBT guidelines apply, including anything associated with benefits, health coverage, supportive programs, ERGs. Even if outside of the office and the broader community, employees are on their own or they may not be as safe. So I've been thinking about, as economies have shut down, as large corporations have moved to remote work, what happens when the embassy is gone, right?
Yeah.
The employees globally who are now, kind of working or operating where they don't have, that safe space. Yeah. They may have an LGBT friendly workplace, doesn't necessarily mean that it's reflected in their local LGBT, their local laws, or broader culture. And so, you think about the rise in violence in certain places globally and things of that nature, when you don't actually have this corporate structure, physical space, to protect you. So,
yeah, I think that's actually really interesting because, I even think about the guidance. I think it was in London, hopefully I'm right, where they basically said, if you're an LGBT person and you're now stuck at home during this time, and they basically recommended that you don't come out because it might not be safe, because you're going to be confined in a home, perhaps with people that may not be so kind. And so many LGBT people really do look to their career, their school, their education as a way out of a bad situation, whether it's trying to leave the country you're in or the state you're in or just environment, home life. That really is the path out and forward, which I think is even more reason to really talk about not only there's talent, there's recruiting, but also retention, because right now you have a lot of LGBT folks who are now working from home, and not everybody's home is, by themselves. Some people do still live at home, whether it's with parents or loved ones, or maybe they're transitioning in between things, and, their futures might seem a little bit different to them now, especially if, post-COVID, who knows how many people might be permanently working from home. That might be, the new way forward. There have been a few companies that have come out to basically say, things are going to look different as far as the physical workforce in the office. And I think, to your point, that really does impact LGBT people quite differently, from a safety perspective and just from a, advancement in their career perspective. And one of the questions that we were going to talk about was also, which kind of leads into this, is as the workforce opens back up and as things kind of get back to, I hesitate to say back to normal, because I don't really think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a new normal, but I don't think things are going to look exactly how they did prior. But as people start returning to work and as offices do start opening, back up, maybe Sharon, do you have any concerns? Do you have any things you're, hopeful for? I know you mentioned a few things, before, but, just more immediately over the next few months, as this is actually happening, what are some of the thoughts that come to mind as far as what we should probably be aware of, or things you should be considering?
I think I come back to value and the value of diversity and inclusion, which I think is much more accepted today than it has been, even in a monetary sense, let alone the whole idea of being kind. But I think it really needs to be kept to the forefront. What type of society do we want to live in? How do we want money, be it our own money or taxpayers' money, to be used? What are we going to prioritize? What are the companies that we want to see of tomorrow? Are we going to continue to give value to those teachers and nurses that have basically been the soldiers out at war during this period? Are we going to continue to value them?
Yeah.
I think that the answer to all of those questions is yes, and that must be kept in the forefront of what we're doing and how we are going to live this through.
Yeah, I think, thinking about our call that we had, prior to today's vodcast, and you mentioned, the parallels between now and the 2008 crash, and how, in Europe, basically everything, that happened with the crash, it kind of resulted in changes of, the sick leave policies and other things that stayed intact afterwards, that were maybe things that should have happened sooner. From your perspective, whether it's, policy or legally or anything, do you see anything like that maybe happening as well, as far as, talking about, what do we want, our professional lives and home lives and that balance to look like now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that concerns me a little bit about all this, and I'd say the same, for myself. We have gone to working at home for those of us who are working, being at home for those of us who are not. But for those of us who've been working at home, like myself, there's a bit of it actually which is enjoyable. If I wasn't so anxious about all the rest, it was pointed out to me by my children, who are not toddlers, that I had not spent so much time at home since my maternity leaves. I am concerned that women in particular will have enjoyed that time at home and might feel more reluctant to step back out and away from the clear benefits of being at home in many respects. But I do think that the society that we're going to create post COVID-19 is one where women need to be in the workforce, need to be leading the workforce, and hopefully actually will have now learned that actually we can work flexibly. There was always a bit of a sort of, I wouldn't say bias against it, but certainly, if you're a high performer, too much working flexibly was not necessarily what you wanted to do. And I think this has shown us all that we can. And it's a perspective that I can and I will, I think needs to carry us through, and we need to carry each other through and be very supportive of each other. And whether you are straight or not straight, or whether you have children or not have children, we each come from different places, but we each have our place in society.
I think yes to what everything you just said. And I want to throw it to Lanaya, but I also want to point out that we actually just got a couple questions. And I think this might, also kind of delve into what we're about to talk about, which is, someone wants to know who has the most at stake going back into the workplace and why, and how can we support our colleagues who maybe most at risk under the pressure of going back to work and the changes that might come. So that kind of goes to what we're talking about right now is, what is this all looking like when we get back to quote unquote normal?
Yeah,
Lanaya, sorry.
Yeah. It's interesting. You think about who's at risk is a
again it's
oh, sorry.
About, is it Lanaya now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sharon, you can go ahead if you like, though.
I'm very happy for Lanaya to take this one.
Yeah. Right. So thinking about who's at risk, I mean, that in itself at the greatest risk is a loaded question. But I think when we return to workplace, what corporate leaders can do, what kind of as members of a team, one can do. Again, I think everyone is tasked with, upholding corporate values and being a part of shaping your company's culture. But we think about the world at large, and to Sharon's point, things will change. Things have changed, and they will never be the same. And I think if we, come back to the workplace with that awareness, and we think about how we're going to navigate, kind of work and that landscape, it'll open us up to being better equipped to explore ways to support, our people, right? To engage or retain key cohorts that have been a focus within your organization. I think, I personally try not to think so much about, which it consumes quite a bit of my mind share, but about the realities that there will be significant headwinds and a very long, kind of recovery.
Yeah.
For certain communities. It's something that this is a reality. But what I think is, with that acknowledgement, we've talked a lot about disruption today, and with that acknowledgement that disruption will not be evenly distributed, as I like to say, the one thing that I am charged about is for everyone, no matter what band level, what whether or not you lead, whether or not you're an individual contributor, but to commit, right, to being a part of addressing bias and understanding the dynamics in play in your work environment when you return to work. I think, collectively, if we're able to do a little bit more of that and come to our experiences with a bit more empathy, exploring bridging capital wherever it exists, we are human. I think that's when we're going to see the greatest response to change, the change that has happened, the change that will happen. And that's the only way that we're going to, if we don't commit collectively, there's no way that one firm or one senior leader or one teammate can eliminate the barriers that impact any company's ability to truly activate their talent, right? Barriers to advancement, things that, lead LGBT people, women, people of color to be discounted in corporate spaces. I think, the real call to action is for us to commit to driving change where we actually, in the spaces that we touch. I think it's if we leave it all to those who are tasked with management, those who are tasked with leading organizations, then we won't get as far. But those are my general thoughts. Sharon, I know you're going to jump in.
No, I mean, I think, I'm looking, we just got a question that I think is interesting, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I think it kind of speaks to what you just said about really kind of committing to, making these changes and making sure that we're supporting where we need to support, and, kind of the realistic view that how things are going to be moving forward. And the question is, how can we support women who are not only working from home, but also managing the increased burden of unpaid care work and domestic labor, especially during school closures, which is a very real thing. If you don't have access to those support systems that you're used to, or maybe you've lost your job or you're furloughed, and how do you, kind of, the reality of still financially supporting a family and yourself and, who else you may take care of, just talking about the real ways that we're going to have to move forward in those. And, I don't know if Lanaya, if you have any other things to add in regards specifically to that question before we close out.
Did Sharon want to jump? Because I know that on our call, she actually had a couple of comments. I know she can't hear me.
Yeah, Sharon.
Comments specific to that.
Yeah.
Sharon, I don't know if you caught that question, but did you want to add anything as far as, the reality of the financial burden and, unpaid care and domestic labor that people are trying to fill that gap in with right now, and what that looks like in the future?
That is not the best question to end a session.
I know.
To be very positive.
It just came in and it had a few votes, and I felt like we should at least address it quickly. Let's talk about what things are going to look like afterwards.
I think that is going to come back to society having to recognize that that piece of one's life is something that you are going to have to bring to the work that you do and the contribution you make. And the only way to actually really deal with that is to really encourage childcare. So France today, is bringing the children back to school really in priority to those working in the offices, because they recognize that there's a huge absence of equality as between people in terms of childcare. So if there is no childcare, how can you get a job? And so it is at the forefront of the French government's approach to deconfinement. But I think government or not government, it's going to have to be at the forefront of deconfinement for a lot of us, including employers. One has to recognise that, you can't just dump the next generation in a room on their own to look after themselves. They have to be looked after, and we have to all contribute to that. Kelly, I need to go.
Yeah. No, I but no, I was going to say
very much for
thank you very much for joining, for both of you. We're going to go ahead and close it out here, but hopefully everybody that tuned in will be able to tune in next time and all of our other podcast events. And thank you, Sharon and Lanaya, for your time and for your insight. We really appreciate it, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.